My name is Khalbunur Siddiq. I am from Urumqi. Our homeland is Turkestan. I'm a witness to the detention camps, and I am ethnically Uzbek. For 20 years, I worked as a Chinese language teacher and I held important administrative positions at Urumqi No. 24 Elementary School. Never did I imagine that one day I would be forced to teach inside a detention camp, or that I would become a witness to the crimes committed by the Chinese Communist Party against Uyghurs and other minority peoples. Today I stand before you to speak about atrocities, including the possibility of organ harvesting. I'll tell you only the truth, only what I personally witnessed and experienced. In March 2017, I was sent under a 6-month contract to teach in a men's camp located on a mountain in Saifango Village, number 5 Saifango Village, Urumqi City. The authorities told us we would be teaching students in a literacy training course, but they were not students. They were prisoners. There were fathers, young men, businessmen, religious figures, intellectuals, people from all walks of life. There are ordinary citizens. There were also elderly men among them. They had been taken from their homes, imprisoned behind barbed wire, triple iron gates, surveillance cameras, armed guards, and locked cells. Every Monday, no classes were held for the detainees. Instead, blood was drawn from them. They were given unidentified injections. Afterwards, they were given small white pills. Chinese nurses told me these are vitamins or calcium supplements. Since the detainees never see sunlight, the government ordered us to take care of them this way. But I did not believe them. How could the government that imprisoned, starved, tortured, and humiliated these people suddenly care about their vitamins? No, that was impossible. At that time and even now, I believe there was another purpose behind it. I also witnessed healthy men disappearing. I clearly remember one man named Osman. He was active in class and eager to learn. He was a wealthy businessman and appeared very strong and healthy at first. Among hundreds of people, I could easily recognize his face. Then one day, he disappeared. When I asked what happened to him, I was told he suffered from high blood pressure and diabetes and had died on the way to the hospital. There was another man who sat at the far end of the first row in the classroom. He too was hardworking, and I still remember his face vividly. Later, he also disappeared. I was told he died from kidney poisoning. I did not believe in these explanations. Every day in the classroom, detainees were constantly replaced. Older and stronger prisoners were taken away, while new ones arrived. A familiar face disappeared, and we were expected to accept whatever explanation the guards gave us. Later, when I testified before parliaments in various countries, I was asked about the disappearance of detainees and organ harvesting. I told them what I had heard while working in the camps. The special police driver who transported me and the police officer assigned to accompany me often talked among themselves. They said, right now in our country, the halal organ trade is booming. The detoxification center in Michuan County, Urumqi, has now become an organ transplant center. I did not witness the surgeries. I did not personally see organs being removed, but I heard these conversations. Later, after hearing my testimony, a close relative and friend of mine living in Europe, married to a foreigner, spoke to me on the condition of anonymity. She personally told me that Michuan's detoxification center had indeed been transformed into an organ extraction hospital. In 2018, she and her foreign husband were sent there for medical examinations before leaving for Europe. During that process, she saw many young detainees wearing prison uniforms, lined up under heavy Chinese police supervision, entering designated rooms. She also observed that the number of doctors had increased greatly, and that doctors were carrying unusual containers in their hands as they exited the rooms. She told me this and begged me to speak about it in my testimony. So for the second time, I heard directly from someone I personally knew, someone who claimed to have seen with her own eyes that this place had become an organ harvesting hospital. In the camps, I witnessed blood collections from detainees, injections, forced medications, disappearances, and the secrecy surrounding everything. Therefore, if you ask me today whether I believe the Chinese Communist Party turned Uyghurs in the camps into a source of profit through a so-called halal organ trade, my answer is yes, yes, 100 times yes. While I was in these camps, I witnessed horrors beyond words. Chinese police humiliate detainees to a level no human being should endure. They stripped them of their humanity. They did not call them by their names, but by numbers. They tried to break their minds, destroy their faith, and erase their destiny. Let me tell you more about what I witnessed, so the world will never forget about the genocide that's taking place in East Turkestan. When I first entered the men's camp, I walked into a building surrounded by barbed wire, electric doors, armed police, soldiers, locked gates. The detainees were brought out from their cells. Chains and shackles were on their hands and feet. Many still had unshaven beards because they had only recently arrived. Their eyes looked at me with desperation, as if I had come to save them. But I could not save them. I could not even help them. Guards surrounded me everywhere. The cells were dark. The windows were still shut. The detainees slept on bare concrete floors with only a thin blanket. For all 3 meals, they received only a small Chinese bun and watery rice soup. They were allowed to use toilet only for a very short period of time. During the entire 6 months I was there, they were never once allowed to bathe. Their bodies weakened, their face changed. Healthy people become thin, pale, and exhausted. I taught 4 hours in the morning, 2 hours in the afternoon, sometimes even for additional hours during inspection periods. But gradually I realized the purpose there was not education. The purpose was control. Later, detainees were forced to memorize rap songs, patriotic songs praising the Chinese Communist Party and Xi Jinping, and political slogans. The detainees were forced to praise the same Communist Party that had imprisoned them. They were forced to express gratitude toward the very system destroying them. During lessons, police would call detainees out, not by name, by their number, then take them for interrogation. The interrogation room was next to the classroom. Shortly after they were taken away, heartbreaking screams could be heard. They were tortured with devices such as electric batons, electric tiger chairs, electric gloves, and electric helmets. After my 6-month assignment in the men's camp ended, I was sent to a women's camp located at Tugong, Saybagh District, Urumqi. There I saw many women and girls. Most were highly educated. Their hair had been cut short. They wore gray prison uniforms with blue numbered vests over them. Their faces were pale and lifeless. About 90% of these detainees were between 18 and 40 years old. The remaining 10% were older women, some even in their 70s and 80s. These women and girls were also given medication and unidentified injections. As a result, many of them completely stopped menstruating. Some had studied abroad. During lessons, they were forced to thank the Chinese Communist Party and the government before telling their stories. One woman said she had recently given birth and still had a nursing baby, but her breast milk had stopped. Another young woman said she had been preparing for marriage when she was suddenly taken to the camp. Excuse me. And she no longer even knew where her fiancé was. Yet she was forced to thank the government for providing such a great opportunity to learn the national language. Others say they had been taken directly to the camp immediately after returning from studies abroad. From the way these women painfully sat and stood, I could sense the severe abuse they had suffered. Tears constantly streamed from their eyes. In this camp, I heard about rape and sexual violence committed by Chinese police. I heard that guards used electric batons and other weapons to abuse these detainees. I personally witnessed the body of a young girl around 18 to 20 years old being carried away before my eyes. I later heard that she had bled to death. Outside camps, the control continued. The Chinese government placed so-called Chinese parent relatives, Han Chinese men inside the homes of Uyghur women. especially in homes where husbands had been taken to the camps. Even in their own homes, these women faced various forms of abuse and humiliation. People were afraid to speak. Phones were monitored. Relatives abroad became a source of danger. My daughter at the time was in the Netherlands, and we lived constantly in fear and anxiety. Under pressure from neighborhood committees, assigned police officers, we were also forced to undergo sterilization procedures at Changleyuan Hospital in Tianshan District. Even though I did not want this, I had no choice. My safety and the safety of my family depended on obeying government demands. That's why I say we no longer had ownership over our bodies. I am one of the fortunate few who managed to escape after enduring tremendous suffering. The people inside the camps cannot speak to you. They have no way to make their voices heard. I am standing here today and at enormous personal cost to tell you this truth. Because the man who disappeared, the women who were abused, and the mothers separated from their children, and the families destroyed by this genocide need witnesses. Honorable Chair, distinguished members of the committee, I ask you not to turn your eyes away from this tragedy. The horrific violence taking place in East Turkestan is not merely a crime. It's part of the system that sees Uyghurs, the original inhabitants of this land, as less than human. This is genocide. The world once said never again, yet East Turkestan, it is happening again. I ask the U.S. Congress never to forget the Uyghur genocide. I urge you to continue your investigations and hold the Chinese Communist Party accountable. Thank you.
Thank you so very much. This first question is for any of the witnesses that would like to answer. Can you provide an assessment of whether any U.S. entities such as hospitals, universities, or research partners have collaborated with the CCP transplant institutions engaging in illegal organ harvesting and trafficking practices?
I can speak to it briefly, but in terms of the details, probably afterwards. I understand that there is actually information that has been gathered at HHS. There's some sort of report that's been gathered by HHS that touches on this question that is kind of, perhaps needs to be dislodged from under a lot of bureaucracy. That's one quick answer. There's an example. The Select Committee wrote a letter to Harvard University about a number of research partnerships that they had. I believe that was last year or within the last couple of years. We trained over 100 transplant surgeons here in the United States from different institutions. That's an obvious connection. I think it would be an amazing effort to try to catalog all of this. And this is something that I'm actually in the process of trying to do, but obviously institutions are uninterested in being terribly cooperative in providing that information if they can avoid it. So that's a roundabout answer for you. Perhaps some of the others here can provide some more exact specifics.
Any other insight from any of the other witnesses?
I did mention Thermo Fisher because they stand out. What our witness here was talking about really didn't begin in 2016 or 2017. It was signaled in 2013 by an unusual tactic, which the police of China used on Falun Gong, actually, initially, and they were coming into people's homes. These were people not in detention, but they were coming into their homes and doing a blood test and a DNA cheek swab. This happened in 5 to 6 provinces. There's a little dispute about the 6th. The point is that the DNA cheek swab indicated a new method some Human Rights Watch interpreted it as a surveillance tool, and that's probably right. But it's also completely compatible with tissue matching, tissue typing, and cross-matching. So that is followed by Thermo Fisher supplying the DNA kits for testing the entire Uyghur and Kazakh population of Xinjiang. Now, this is not something that Han Chinese, they were exempt, and they're practically half the population. But the entire population, everybody above the age of 12 had to be tested. And the DNA kits apparently were all supplied by Thermo Fisher. They made a killing in this market.
Let me ask you this right here. Do any of the witnesses have factual data related to how these body parts are coming to America? And, they've got to get here somehow. Anybody, any of that going on?
Can I just jump in on that? I don't believe parts are coming to America, really. I mean,
There are people that believe they are.
well, that's fine, but it's certainly not my experience in China on the ground. Is they like to have complete control of organ harvesting, and I've never seen absolutely persuasive evidence, other than certainly there's good speculation, probably correct, about fetal body parts and fetal tissue being sold to our great universities. I don't think there's any question that they've moved on from Planned Parenthood, and China's the supplier. Proving that, of course, conclusively is
Absolutely.
very important.
Okay. Do you believe the existing U.S. safeguards are enough to prevent American institutions from indirectly endorsing or profiting from these practices, or should the U.S. government explore further measures such as increased transparency, reporting, or funding restrictions?
I think those are absolutely necessary and totally plausible, and they are things that we should be doing in face of this documentation, eyewitnesses of what's taking place. I mean, that's what Congress should be doing, and passing the bills like the forced organ or stopping forced organ harvesting, and including these types of provisions in that type of bill. Broad support, and I think it also is a moral stand for people in this country to take through their members of Congress to pass such legislation. We will not participate in any way, shape, or form in this type of horrific practice, and here's how we're expressing that.
Thank you. Mr. Gutman, in your estimation, what is the scale and scope of illegal sourced organs in China?
I'm not there with a clipboard, but, and my work has concentrated on the Uyghurs, but I do believe that this is the main source now. Our 2016 report was done with David Kilgore and David Matus, and a team of Falun Gong researchers who had spent 5 years collecting the data. Now, we came up with the idea that organs were basically, the transplant hospitals had been rationalized to about 150, or now it's more like 200, and that they were doing at least one transplant per day based on their capabilities. That quickly leads you to a number at least of 60,000.
Okay.
And we believe, I believe that it's more closer to 100,000.
Thank you, Mr. Gutman. Mr. Brownback, can you elaborate on how religious freedom can play a strategic role in our diplomatic engagement strategy with the CCP, and how would you recommend that tool be wielded to strengthen U.S. leadership and diplomacy?
I think you just watch and study what Ronald Reagan did in the face-off with the Soviet Union. It was the same godless, atheistic society. He traveled across the country. He pointed this out. He said, and then he also talked about what was the treatment of Jews in the country and evangelicals, the Jewish refuseniks. He brought the American public into it, and that's what has to be done. I think we can, and I think this is a critical piece of our theater engagement strategy with the CCP, which we're now engaged in how we're going to fight with this group is religious freedom. They can't tolerate it. They can't stand it. The American public strongly supports it. Western civilization does. So we need to start talking about that differentiation, and we need to start thinking about it in those sorts of strategic engagement ways. We ought to invite Chinese dissidents that have been persecuted for their faith to the White House to meet with the president, the vice president, meet with the Secretary of State as a show. They ought to bring the head, invite the person that started Falun Gong, Li Hongzhi, see if he would come to the White House to meet with the president. He's exiled in the United States in New York. And this is a group that's been decimated, slaughtered in the most vile of ways, because they can't tolerate this indigenous faith that is so natural to China. It's a blended kind of faith of Buddhism, Taoism, Confucian thought, but it's very natural to China, and it was a complete threat to the Chinese Communist Party. And all the Falun Gong wants is a return to the old Chinese civilization that existed before the communists took over. That's really all they want. And so bring them in and start authenticating. And then I also think it would be wise for us to start talking with Tibetan individuals and Tibet authorities about the future of Tibet. This is a place that's never been a part of China. We should be bringing those individuals and talking with them as well. I've got a list of other specific items in my testimony.
Thank you. And Mr. Brownback, this will be my final question. How has intimidation against religious groups outside of China impacted these groups, their worship, their advocacy, their personal lives?
Horribly. Yeah, most Uyghurs I talk to and work with have had family members back home that have disappeared, been killed. They've Falun Gong members that will cite to those. I've had people in this country who have been tracked, shot at, that have testified to me, that have been open people that have testified against what's going on in the CCP, tracked, marked, tires slashed in this country. This transnational oppression, or another person referred to as transnational terrorism. And I think we've really got to be much more aggressive at prosecuting these cases when they happen in this country.
In your testimony, you mentioned American universities partnering with CCP transplant centers to train transplant surgeons and conduct joint research. You also mentioned that some of these partnerships received NIH funding. Do you have a comprehensive list that you can provide this commission of instances where there is U.S. government-funded American universities that are funding transplant research supported by the CCP? I know you mentioned you're putting together that list.
I don't know if I can provide a comprehensive list because it's a process, but I will provide the best list I can. Yeah.
I recently introduced legislation to ban federal funding to universities that employ foreign researchers who were previously employed by the Chinese Communist government, specifically those that work in sensitive research areas. Do you agree that U.S. taxpayer dollars should not go to universities that financially, directly or indirectly, support the Chinese government facilitating illegal organ harvesting?
So this is a complete no-brainer, absolutely. And just as a matter of fact, right, even people that come here, there are people that come here that want freedom, that are not wanting to work for the Chinese Communist Party, but their national intelligence law demands that they do, that they provide, that they basically spy and not admit that they're doing so. So it's a very difficult situation that people are put in. But I would say any sensitive area, forced organ harvesting, absolutely, but any sensitive area, it doesn't make sense.
One other concern that I have raised is some American universities, as we know, operate branch campuses in communist China. And I recently introduced legislation to stop the flow of taxpayer dollars to these institutions that frankly are profiting off of our adversaries. Are you concerned that these universities, and therefore American taxpayers, could be directly or indirectly implicated in cases of organ harvesting?
I'm absolutely concerned. I don't know of specific instances of this, but again, you can sort of imagine this sort of the thesis, I guess, of my book, the true nature of America's biggest adversary. You have to understand the Communist Party. This is a group, this is a regime that does these sorts of horrible things to people. Imagine how they view, you know, sort of gullible or financially incentivized Americans who have set up a campus in communist China. It's not good intent, let's say.
Thank you. Ambassador Brownback, thank you for your leadership. You mentioned a number of actions the U.S. should take on the world stage to raise this issue, and yet we have seen in international organizations like the UN, they have been incredibly uncooperative, despite the fact that American taxpayers are footing the majority of the bill. Do you think, well, let me ask it this way, how can the U.S. strongly lead on these issues of human rights? And I think I know the answer to this. Do you think the UN can be a reliable partner of the United States when it comes to addressing this? I certainly do not think it's a reliable partner.
I think they've proven no. They're not interested. But I think more than that, they're so infiltrated by the Chinese Communist Party, the UN is, and so many of the various branches and entities of it. Even if they wanted to, I don't think they could get it. I don't think they could get it done. But that's why it's incumbent upon us, and we're the only country in the world that can do this. Nobody else. So at the G20, religious freedom should be front and center. And remember, they fear religious freedom more than they fear our aircraft carriers or nuclear weapons. This goes right at control to them, and they've got the fastest growing Christian population in the world. So they know this. And they're looking and saying, we've got to hold this down, and these are people we should be standing with and backing aggressively everywhere that we can, and we've got a lot of tools so we can do that, as I've mentioned some of those already.
Thank you very much. Again, thank you, Mr. Chairman, for conducting this very important hearing. I yield back.
Yep. When we discovered in the 60s that the Soviet Union was torturing dissidents by putting them into mental hospitals, the World Psychiatric Association responded by banning any contact with the Soviet psychiatrists or any of their institutions. And that meant everything. It was a complete ban. There was no work on psychoactive drugs together or anything like that. Now we're looking at a very different situation. I mean, something like Pfizer goes into China and tests Chinese citizens who've had transplants, and they're probably carrying around a Falun Gong or a Uyghur organ, or possibly even a House Christian church organ. This is absolutely should not be defended in any way. And of course, from the academic perspective, they've absolutely not responded at all to this. This should be a blanket ban. That's what we had in the 60s. I'm not saying it worked perfectly. I don't think it really changed Soviet behavior on how many dissidents got thrown into mental hospitals. But at the end of the day, we made a point, and the world made a point. And today we're just looking at a kind of a chaotic situation, I think, on contact with China.
Congressman, or Co-Chair Smith, we've gotten into this habit, ever since. I remember I interviewed you some years ago, and we talked about how this linkage of human rights and trade was broken during the Clinton administration. And, basically ever since that, human rights have been off the table. They've been in these off the books or quiet dialogues, which basically both sides, from what we learned on reporting, viewed cynically subsequently, like they were purely performative, basically. This human rights, it makes no sense, right? Because if you're, as a regime, you're treating your people in a particular way, in this particular egregious way, right? The Chinese Communist Party has treated, hundreds of thousands of its people. How do they view Americans, right? And this feels lost somehow on people. Like we've gotten into this habit of saying, okay, the human rights, you just keep that off the table. Got to keep it quiet. Got to keep it Of course, I understand that the U.S. government is raising these things in the appropriate venue and so forth, but as Ambassador Brownback has talked about as well, it's their huge Achilles heel, right? They're doing terrible things to their own people, and we should make our own population here in America as aware as possible of that, right? And not sort of play to the kind of platitudes or their propaganda that this is all kind of false and just attacks on China and so forth. So I think human rights is the key.
You know, oh, yeah,
I was just going to say, Mr. Chairman, I thought you said something earlier that I want to double back to, that for years China's been given a bye on this, and they really have for decades, really until President Trump. He's the first president since Kennedy to actually take them on. Now, today he's saying all these things about Xi Jinping that I'm questioning about, but maybe that's part of the negotiating tactic. I hope it is. It seems like to me that buy is starting to be pulled off, and they're getting not a buy as much anymore, and we need to get to the point where they don't get a buy at all. And I think a key piece of this is just really following the money. As a governor, I saw that our universities in our state, the university heads, their primary concern every morning they got up was money. Money coming into the place, make sure the doors were operating. And I don't begrudge them that. They've got a big institutions to run. They got to make sure we got plenty of money coming in here to run this place. That's what they're thinking about. And so China comes along and says, here, we've got resources that you can use, and this will be, that's why you've got to break these two economies apart. That's why the key piece of this, actually, I think two key pieces. One, breaking the economies apart. And second, us standing up for human rights, particularly religious freedom, because it's such a weakness on their part. This is one of those things, it's kryptonite to them. And they do everything they can to suffocate it and hold it out of the room. When they bring up Taiwan, we should bring up religious freedom. When they bring up any of these issues, we should bring these, because this is just something they cannot tolerate. And it's just such an effective tool. And finally, I think we ought to also double back and really press about opening up the great internet firewall that China has. Can you, I mean, this is the second largest economy in the world, and you got an internet firewall around your people? Come on, that's not leadership, that's suffocation. And we really should embarrass them about it.
You know, very interesting point about the internet. On one of my trips when I could get a visa, I went to an internet cafe. I typed in torture, and I got everything about what the Imperial Japan did vis-a-vis torture, and George Bush at Gitmo, which was false in my opinion, but it was still there. Then I put in Manfred Nowak, and he was mentioned earlier because he did a tremendous job at exposing, on behalf of the UN, the torture there. And nothing, nothing. I put in Tiananmen Square. I got nothing but pretty pictures of people smiling in Tiananmen Square. No tanks, no tank man, no anything. It was really amazing. And so we really have to find our voice more than ever right now. I remember meeting Wei Jingsheng after he was allowed out in 1994. The Chinese Communist Party thought they would get the Olympics 2000 by doing that. They didn't get it. They rearrested him. But while he was out, I was in Beijing. We had dinner together, and he says, please, will you Americans understand this? When you kowtow and you weakly approach the Chinese Communist Party, they beat us more in prison. And he's the father of the democracy wall movement. He suffered almost death at the hands of his torturers. And it's like, we've got to find our voice and stop saying, oh, by the way, human rights. I mean, it doesn't work that way. We have to be so upfront. And this issue of killing people, you know, I read a book before I came to Congress about Unit 731, where Imperial Japan did horrific torture against people, mostly service members, and during World War II in China. And I look at that, then I look at what they're doing now and say, you know, you hated what happened to you, and I do too, but why are you replicating it in very, very large numbers beyond that? So but I would like to ask Mr. Gutman, if you don't mind, walk us through, if you could, or any of you, what a victim goes through. They've already been typed for their blood type and all the other things, so that a match can be immediately be made. You had said before that there's pretty much an equal male to female, number of women that are being average age 28 to 29, being slaughtered, murdered for their organs, as well as males, men, young men. If you could just, what is this like?
I would, this is perhaps not the answer people want to hear in a way, but it's actually less painful than it used to be, partly because of Dr. Ko Wen-je, who pioneered this technique of using ECMO, okay? That meant, originally, what you would have to do is do very light anesthesia, okay, because you don't want to put a sluggish organ into another human being, right? So the anesthesia had to be very light, and it was actually a very painful procedure, according to Nijat, who was a Uyghur who worked with the PSB. Now, when he put in this new technique, it basically meant you could put the person under pretty much full anesthesia, and you'd have the oxygenated organ. It would be kind of running through, so you had constant, kind of in a loop. You go into slow motion, but not that bad. And basically that meant that you could take out the organs in a much more rational way. And you could take them out slower, and you could one after the other, and finally the heart's the last to go. I don't think the person is actually feeling that much. I think if you want, we've made improvements in this area. Now, the problem with that is that it also means that the person who was worth, you could only get an organ or two out of and plausibly get it to the destination. This is something Didi Kirsten-Tatlow from the New York Times worried about a lot. That person is now worth a lot more money, because you can take out maybe up to 5 organs successfully, or 4 organs. Before it was only 1 or 2. Now we're in a very different situation, because you've got like 16 hours, 24 hours to work with this perfusion method. And I'm not saying it's ECMO right now. By the way, I went to Taiwan for 6 months to try to figure this out, and I don't know which perfusion method they are using. I know it started with ECMO. And ECMO, this is an off-label use. For any doctors out there listening, I am not criticizing ECMO. It's a life-saving device. It's fantastic. But this is the way it's been used. And we're looking at a very kind of brave new world situation. I was saying that they don't take organs around the world. That's now possible. I'm not saying they're doing it, because I see no actual evidence of that, but it could happen.
But people go there to get the organ, right?
Well, right now, people go to China, but it's increasingly these techniques have led to a different world where it is possible for them to fly out organs, say, to Saudi or somewhere like that, or Russia, or Berlin. This is what we're kind of looking at, and it also means new populations are potentially at risk. I don't want to, we don't see the evidence for this now. As far as I'm concerned, the Chinese are a lot like the old Soviet Union. They like to keep their rocket ships landing right in the country, not in international waters. And that's the way they've been, but.
And just the average cost? I mean, how much do they make, like, for a liver or some other organ?
Well, it depends on who's buying it. Obviously, if it's a foreigner, it's going to be about, $100,000 for a liver these days, or something like that, and more like $200,000 for a heart or lungs, where you sometimes get a package deal. Now, if you're Japanese and don't want to negotiate, you might end up paying $1 million. So there's huge differences between, say, Koreans, Japanese, Germans, Americans, and so forth. But we are still talking about huge profits potential on every individual who's this healthy and is done correctly. Thanks.
Co-Chair Smith, I just wanted to comment on the new populations. So one of the things I noticed kind of anecdotally, I'm very sensitive to this dehumanizing rhetoric that's used to target the population first to get the rest of the population to kind of accept horrible things being done. It looked to me anecdotally that there's this uptick of that against Christians in China, and I actually talked with Bob Fu over here on American Thought Leaders on my show about this, and this isn't studied empirically sort of thing, but it really does look like as there's this increased incarceration of Christians, with the Zion Church, this, restrictions on Catholic clergy and so forth, that there's this increase in dehumanizing rhetoric as well. I would love it if someone would study that empirically, but that's a big concern because that is always this dehumanization is a prequel to inclusion and as a group for forced organ harvesting.
Thank you.
As we sit today here, the PRC human rights atrocities such as forced organ harvesting, the President is participating in the U.S.-China summit. I think it's unfortunate that human rights issues don't seem to be high on the list of agenda topics in that summit. Because for years, folks here before us, researchers, ethics experts, survivors, and human rights advocates have raised alarming evidence, presented, I should say, alarming evidence that the PRC has systematically targeted Uyghurs, Falun Gong practitioners, and other religious and ethnic minorities for forced organ harvesting. As we've heard today, detainees have been subject to unexplained blood testing and medical screening while in detention camps and prisons, and many later disappeared. Researchers estimate that tens of thousands of individuals, perhaps more, have been killed to supply China's transplant industry. This is a profound moral crisis, and I thank all of our witnesses for your commitment to addressing it. Now, this commission, thanks to Co-Chair Smith's leadership, has documented evidence showing that Uyghurs and other Turkic minorities detained may now be a primary source of organs within China's transplant system. The targeting of Falun Gong practitioners and Uyghurs reflects, as we've heard today, a broader campaign of religious persecution that includes Christians in China, ethnic repression and dehumanization carried out by the PRC. And this commission has to continue examining these allegations and working to ensure that the abuses are documented and pushing for them to come to an end. Ms. Sadiq, she can hear? Yes. Oh, okay. Ms. Sadiq, here in America, folks might hear terms like detention camp or forced labor, but they might not understand what daily life is like in those camps and under this system. Can you just describe for us the atmosphere of fear inside and outside the camps that we've heard about today?
Салам қалуыныр, авазымды аңлайсыз ғой,
Aldı be.
Азыр парламент әзасы Акиншал сіздің бір суал сорды, яна бұл сорған дейді, ойлақы лагерлан дегенде, мәйлі тұтып тұрған лагер болсын, мәжбүр әмгек лагерлер болсын, дейді. Америкалықлар бәк түшініп кетмейді. Шыныңға сіз ашу лагер ішчідікі ләнің күнділік hayatı қандақлығыны, сырткілерінің hayatının қандақлығыны бей түшендіріп бәген болсыңыз, дейді. Şunu bir düşündüm.
Rahmet, yaxşı bir sualınızga. Ben erler lagırda 6 ay turuş jarayonida intayın dehşetlik zulümlerini öz gözümde gördüm. Yani bu yerdeki erler kamerlarda 30'dan 40'ça kısılışıp kuruk simotun üstüne yatattı.
When I was sent to the men's camp for 6 months, I saw horrific atrocities in those camps. One example is just in a little cell, 30 to 40 males are locked up. They sleep on a very thin blanket.
Ular yana atalmış sınıflarga kamerlardan ömülep çıkarttı ve ömülep kaytattı. Onundan sırf yana bular muşundaq 4 xil qiynash usuli orqali so'roqlar jarayonida qiynash apparatdi. Ya'ni so'roqxona sinfning yindiki yarasi uyda bo'lg'achqa, ularning ustidagi nomerlar orqali chaqirib ichikatgandan keyin yarım saat, 1 soatgacha ularning ichinish ovozi bütün zalni zilzilaga solatdi.
And these detainees are usually crawled in, they're crawled out in a situation like that. And the interrogation room is right next to the classroom. So usually they take detainees out for half an hour and an hour-ish. We hear this extreme screams from these detainees.
Ular atalmış sınıflarda mana muşundaq put-qo'llari zanjir bilan kishanlangan holda pakar kichik o'rindiqlarda tugilishib o'tiradi. Har soat darsda boshdan oxiri ularning ko'zlaridan yosh to'xtamaydi. Men u yerda nihoyat o'zim tutib olgan holatda intayin diqqat qilyaptım. Çünkü sınıfdaki tört etraflarda bütün kameralar bo'lg'achqa, men har bir so'zimda, har bir harakatlarimda diqqat qilishga majbur edim.
And these detainees are all chained and shackled. They are given little tiny chairs to sit down. You could see from their faces how scared, desperate they are. And you could see cry a stream, from their tears. But there is nothing, I can do. I have to be very careful because it's all cameras. And so I have to watch every word and my action in the class.
Kız ayollar kamerdimu, u yer tutqun kız ayollar xuddi Robert odamlarga o'xshash, o'zining hayotidan butunlay umidini uzgan holda shu sinflarda qarab o'tiradi faqatlam. Endi u qiz ayollar kameralaridagi tualetlar shu kameraning ichida bo'lib, bir chilak o'rnatilgan. Bu chilakni 24 soat navbatishib tukdi. Kameraning ichi, koridorning ichi ichinishliq, noyatlik, sisiq puroqning darda to'g'ilmaydi.
And in the women's prison, you could see all these women are like robots, no hope, no life in their faces. And the toilet is just a bucket in the cell, They only dumped it once 24 hours. And so their life is really, really horrible. And the cell, the corridors stink because of that.
Tutqun qiz ayollarning sochlari butunlay tushirib uchisida bir tutash mahbus kiyimi bor. U mahbus kiyimning nomeri besilgan bo'lg'achqa, ularning ismlarini atamasdan nomerlar orqali chaqirib achkitib, ularni dahshatli so'roqlarni qiladi. Qiz ayollarning sinflarda o'ltirib va noyatli qo'pqanda qiynalganliklaridan men ularning og'ir darajada so'roqlar uchirganligi va shu yerda anglagan soqchilarning har xil shaklda bosqinchiliklar olib borgan va qo'ldagi elektronlik kaltaklar bilan qiynash olib borganligini o'zim his qilyaptim.
All these women's hair are shaved, and they all have vests with numbers. So whenever they are called not by name, by the vest numbers. And I could see when I teach them, they're sitting down, getting up is extremely difficult. You could see clear torture marks. And at times, I hear they were abused and raped.
Bu yerda her düşenbe ders ötülmeydi. Çünkü ularga nama'lum doğru berdi, hukuklurdu ve ularning qanagan bo'lg'achqa qiz ayollarning odatlari butunlay to'xtab ketgan. Hatto bolalar imitayotganlarningmi tuslari to'xtab ketgan edi.
And every Monday, these women are given unidentified medications. So mothers who are nursing, their milk stop, and women's menstruation stop.
Ben bir qatimla qiz ayollar kamer ders o'tgan vaqtimda vatan to'g'risida bir temada ders o'tdim. Bu yerda qiz ayollar shuning jumla jarayonida o'zining hikoyalarini menga aytib berishga tirishadi. Buningda bir qiz dedi, men yangi tug'utdim. Mening bolam tek imbatgan. Men oldin bilan hukumat va partiyaga rahmatimni bildiraman. Chunki bu yerda bir davlat tili o'tish fursatiga meni erishtirdi, ammo mening sutim to'xtab ketdi deb so'zlab berdi.
At one class, I taught about motherland, meaning China, about that. Then one lady stood up and thanked the Chinese Communist Party and the government for giving her the opportunity to study there in the camp, the Chinese language. And at the same time, she talked about that she just had a baby and in the camp, her milk stopped. And
Yana bir qiz o'quvchi deydi, mening bir haftadan keyin to'yim bo'ladi. Men to'yiqsiz bu yerga kelib kelindim, ammo hukumat partiyaga rahmatimni bildiraman. Men bag'oqlarni taqib bo'lgan, mening qarshi taraf yigitimning qayerligini bilmayman degan hikoyalarni o'z og'zida aytib berdi.
And another young woman also said, I was supposed to get married a week later before I was taken. Wedding invitations were all out. But I'm grateful for the Chinese Communist Party for taking me here for education, even though I don't know where my fiancé is.
Yana ba'zilar bo'lsa, chet ellarda o'qib, o'zining vataniga qaytib kelganda ota-onasi kamman degan unumay, o'zining vatanini yaxshi ko'rgachga qaytib kelganligini va aeroportda ota-onasini ko'rishmaylar, udulmush kampalarga kelganligini, o'zining jumla tuzash jarayonida shu Xitoy hukumatiga, partiyasiga oldi bilan rahmatini bildirgandan keyin mushundaq so'zlar bilan o'zining hikoyasini so'zlab berdi.
and some others who came straight from studying overseas, despite their parents telling them not to come back, they returned out of their love for their parents, their homeland. But they were taken from the airport, sent to the camps straight. And there, they also had no choice but to thank the Chinese Communist Party for their treatment. Rahmat.